Hey everybody, welcome back to Mondays with Jess. We are down to our last 3 sessions, and what a journey we've been on so far. Are you as impressed with Ruth as I am? You know, when Orpah left, Ruth stayed. When Naomi allowed their circumstances to fill her with bitterness, Ruth sought refuge under the wings of God. It's no wonder to me that all of Bethlehem could talk of nothing else but this strange Moabite woman who had such depth and strength of character. Kelly points out that Ruth's pursuit of God was anything but ordinary. You know, last week we left off when Ruth had finished gleaning in Boaz's field on day 1. She came home with so much barley that Naomi jumps up out of the chair and wants to know with whom Ruth had found such favor. When she finds out that Ruth had been gleaning in the fields of Boaz, and that Boaz is a close relative of theirs, Naomi begins to hope that perhaps Boaz might be the kinsman redeemer she so hoped for. Naomi tells Ruth, "Do not glean anywhere else, but continue to glean in Boaz's fields and stay close to his young women." It's kind of funny, Boaz told Ruth to do the very same thing. We are about to get to the cliffhanger in our story, but before we do, I would like to point out one small thing. Please read with me Ruth 2:23. So she, Ruth, stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law. Ruth heeds the instructions of Boaz and Naomi, and she continues to glean in Boaz's fields until the end of the harvest. The harvest would have begun in late April, and it would have finished in early June, so this is about an 8-week period. This is important to note, because it wasn't until the end of the barley harvest that Naomi sends Ruth out on a secret mission. Boaz has had some time to really get to know and observe Ruth. Remember, Naomi finds out that Ruth is gleaning in Boaz's fields on day 1, but she doesn't act on this information immediately. Instead, she waits for the timing to be right. Waiting is not easy, especially when it's your future that hangs in the balance. We also will experience waiting times in our lives. We can choose to trust the Lord and His timing, or we can try and orchestrate our own plans. Psalm 27:14 says, "Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and He will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say wait on the Lord." Let me tell you from personal experience, it is always best to wait and let God direct your path. It turns out we are not too good at navigating our own lives. Okay, so 8 weeks have passed and the harvest time is almost over, and Naomi decides now is the time to launch Operation Boaz. She wants to secure a future for Ruth. You know, Naomi no longer sees Ruth as just a daughter-in-law, but instead she calls her daughter. Ruth has come to mean so much more to her, and as a good mother, she wants to make sure that Ruth has a future, and so she comes up with a plan. Naomi tells Ruth very detailed instructions. She knows that Boaz will be on the threshing floor winnowing the barley. She tells Ruth to wash, to anoint herself, to put on her best gown. She tells Ruth to go unnoticed to the threshing floor, and she is to wait for Boaz to finish eating and drinking. When Boaz lies down, Ruth is to go to Boaz and to uncover his feet, and then she's to lie down by his feet and wait for Boaz to give her further instruction. Of course, Ruth obediently does everything that Naomi requests. Unlike me, I would have wanted to know the detailed plans of why I was doing what I was doing, and I probably would have had a million questions. Ruth's strength of character to just simply obey speaks volumes. Sometimes God asks us to do something that doesn't make a bit of sense, and instead of questioning Him, sometimes He would like for us to just trust, to just obey, and then let Him handle the outcome. To understand the risk that Naomi was asking Ruth to take, we must once again look at the culture and the context. The threshing floor was not a place wholesome girls went in the dead of night. During the winnowing process, the men would sleep next to their piles of grain. The prostitutes knew this, and therefore would come to the threshing floor at night offering their services. In a sense, the threshing floor became a brothel by night. Ruth's character could have easily been compromised had anybody seen her, but thankfully God was with her. The uncovering of Boaz's feet was also an extremely personal and intimate thing to do. We are told that Ruth carries out Naomi's instructions exactly, and then she has to wait for Boaz to realize she is even there. I can only imagine the thoughts that must have been going through her mind and how nervous and afraid she must have been. She had done all she could do, and now her fate lay in the hands of Boaz. She wasn't asking him for grain or for water. She was asking for him to marry her. Have you ever been at a point in your life like this? God has asked you to do something and you have obeyed him, and then you are left waiting, not sure what the outcome will be? Esther faced this as well. Mordecai tells Esther she must go plead for her people's lives before the king. Esther reminds Mordecai she's not allowed to seek an audience with the king unless called for, as she could be put to death. Mordecai sends word back, "Don't think that if you remain silent, Esther, God will not save his people another way. But maybe this is the reason you are here in the palace, for such a time as this." Esther tells Mordecai to have the people pray and fast for 3 days for her, and then she will go before the king. And if she dies, she dies. Esther had to choose to obey God, not knowing what would happen. She had to trust him and then wait 3 agonizing days to see whether or not the king would accept her request. Here, Ruth has risked Boaz perhaps being angry with her at this request of marriage. What if he calls her character into question? After all, she is lying at his feet in the middle of the night. Boaz is finally startled awake, it says around midnight, and he does find a strange woman lying at his feet, and he inquires as to who it is. Please read with me Ruth 3:9. And Boaz said, "Who are you?" So she answered, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." Ruth decides to tell Boaz up front what her intentions are. Remember, Boaz cares about character, and I'm sure Ruth wanted to make sure Boaz understood she was not there for a one-night encounter. Ruth must have been so nervous. Even in today's world, the woman does not commonly ask the man to marry her. In Ruth's day, a woman proposing to a man just didn't happen. She was forging into untested waters. She was willing to risk his rejection to secure a future for not only herself but for Naomi. This isn't the first time we have seen Ruth be selfless. From leaving her homeland, to following Naomi, to Bethlehem, to working hard to make sure her mother-in-law did not go hungry, to risking her very own reputation to secure them both a future, Ruth was willing. Oh, what God can do with a willing heart. Let's read Boaz's response in Ruth 3:10-13. Then Boaz said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, and that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. Now it is true that I am a close relative, but however, there is a relative closer than even I. Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning." Boaz did not seem to mind the unusual request Ruth was making. In fact, he seemed downright ecstatic. He calls her blessed and kind. He praises her for not seeking the lustful eye of a young man, but choosing instead him. We will all be blessed as well when instead of choosing the attractive things of the world, we obey God and follow the truth found in his word. As Boaz was speaking, Ruth must have looked like a deer caught in the headlights because Boaz tells her not to fear. He most certainly will honor her request. But, oh, how I hate that word sometimes. Boaz tells her there is a closer relative than him that must be given the option to redeem the family land first. Boaz will find out if this man wants to be the kinsman redeemer as soon as daylight begins. I love how Boaz is consistent with his character. He knows that by law, this other man has the right to redeem the family property and to marry Ruth first, and he honors that law, even though I know he loved Ruth and wanted her for himself. Boaz doesn't make any false promises to Ruth, but lets her know the reality of the situation. He doesn't try to orchestrate his own plans or try and deceive this other gentleman. He knows a relationship started on the foundation of deception will never stand. Boaz, too, knew that he could trust God to work out the details. Boaz tells Ruth to remain at his feet until morning, but he has her leave before anyone can recognize her. Boaz didn't want Ruth's character to come into question either. He knew if Ruth was seen, assumptions could and would be made. He doesn't send her away empty-handed, though. Instead, he sends her back with a gift for Naomi, a rather large gift. He sends her back with 6 ephahs of barley. This would have been anywhere between 58 and 95 pounds of grain. Imagine how Ruth feels walking back with this large bag of grain as she heads back to the home she shares with Naomi. She has the relief of finally knowing that Boaz was willing to marry her, but she may not end up with him after all. What if this man, this stranger, decides to redeem the property and to marry her? I bet she kind of feels like being engaged but not having an engagement ring. She has Boaz's comforting words, but she has nothing to seal the commitment. Could she trust God to work it out? Ruth tells Naomi all that happened over a hot cup of tea. I added the hot cup of tea part. And she shows Naomi the grain that Boaz has given her. Naomi offers Ruth reassurance that while she doesn't know what the outcome will be either, they will know one way or the other by today's end. Throughout her journey, Ruth has been brought to a place where she's had to continually trust in God. The night she went to the threshing floor, it was just her and the Lord. While Naomi had come up with the plan, only Ruth alone could carry it out. I want to leave you with a quote from Kelly. She says, "Let's face it, some places we can only go with God by ourselves. There's just no way to take anyone with us. And once Ruth gets to the threshing floor, there will be no guarantees. She has been promised nothing. Her venture was not a demand on God. If I take the risk of going there, then you must. It was simply a walk of faith, a humble obedience with no strings attached. And this is the way we must approach our own threshing floors, without demands, sometimes in the dark, alone, but with the expectation that God will always be found faithful and good." I hope you all have enjoyed today's session. Please don't forget to go to the Women of Worth Facebook page for today's notes and discussion questions. I can't wait to find out what will happen. See you next week.